Good afternoon, folks. Good morning, depending where you are. This is Leo Raymond from Mailers Hub, and we want to welcome you to today's Mailers Hub webinar on cybersecurity. Bad things don't always happen to other people. So we're going to talk about, data breach as has happened to some of our friends and colleagues, and using real case scenarios. Scott Wrobel of N1 Discovery will give us some changes in cyber attacks, what's going on, the cost, how it's happening, as well as some security suggestions. Before co-founding N1 Discovery, Scott had accumulated over 20 years of experience implementing technology solutions for clients facing a wide variety of situations. He began his career as a software developer and quality tester. Scott specializes in complex technology investigations and data breaches. Scott and his team have led numerous high-profile digital forensic investigations, including cases involving theft of intellectual property, fraud, child exploitation, and white-collar crimes. We had Scott speak to one of our other meetings earlier this year, and he spoke about a real-life situation involving one of our subscribers. So, as we said, this doesn't always happen to other people. So with that in mind, I'll turn it over to Scott and let him give you today's presentation. Scott, please take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Leo. Welcome, everyone. Let me make sure I can control the screen here. Okay. Well, thank you for all attending. Again, my name is Scott Wrobel. I'm from N1 Discovery, one of the founders of N1 Discovery. And today I'm going to talk about a little bit about who I am, spend very little bit of time on that, and talk more about cyber incidents, cyber attacks, most importantly, the ransomware attacks that you may have all heard of and may have experienced. We'll talk about some new facts that have come out, changes in the attacks that are happening, that impact and the cost to those that are affected by it, and really talk about why it's happening and how it's happening, and give you some tips and tricks to try and avoid being a victim of these attacks. N1 Discovery was founded as a forensics investigation company, and we provide these four things: digital forensics, e-discovery, cybersecurity, and intelligence services. Basically, it's all around investigation. Whether it's investigating an employee that has done something wrong, we apply digital forensics, or you're in litigation and you have to provide discovery as part of the litigation. If it's a cyber incident, a breach, or just intelligence gathering, investigation, background checks, things like that. So everything we do is based on forensics. So let's start with some of the facts. And I want to make sure everyone understands that when we talk about facts and statistics, a lot of these facts and these numbers that we're showing are only what is presented and what is reported. There are so many attacks, and you may be one of them. You may have had an attack, had an incident, and it was not disclosed to the government or to any agency, so therefore it may never even hit these numbers. So when I give these cyber facts and statistics, recognize they're probably double what they actually are. These are what are known and what have been reported. 76% of these organizations experienced attack in 2017. That might be much, much higher. Mobile malware variants have increased by 54%. That was in 2017. 2018 now has seen a much higher degree. Phishing attacks, that's when you get those emails that you think it's someone you know or you think it's real, and now they're releasing these Trojans into the environment through email. There's a very large increase in the amount of attacks on Apple Macs. It used to be those were the safest and there were no real hacks, but now there's a large focus from the bad actors to develop malware that can attack Macs. And there's an average user receives 16 malicious emails per month. That has gone way up, and there's probably more that you don't even know that your filter system stopped. But these malicious emails are just as bad as those robocallers you get on your phone now. They constantly come in, and it's very difficult to stop. An increase in new ransomware variants, 46%. I know for a fact that has gone up dramatically. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but there are so many new viruses that come out on a daily basis. They're taking old variants and changing them and creating new ones so that they're not detected. So the percentage of that has gone up dramatically. Let's talk about the changes. The reason why we're here today, and the reason why we're talking about these things, and the reason why it's in the news all the time, is because of these 4 factors. These bad actors, these hackers, are very well funded. They're smarter, they're more advanced, and they're very patient. And what I mean by that is that the ransomware itself is more expensive. The latest ones that we've been working on, they're asking for $400,000, $500,000 worth of Bitcoins. They're not asking for a number of Bitcoins anymore. They're asking for an amount because they know that the Bitcoin amount fluctuates so much. So they're asking for so much more money per attack. They know what the type of company that they've gotten into, and they want to increase the amount. The incredible part about that is every single one of these, whether it's $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, that's probably one of maybe 40 or 50 that they've done that month alone. So add that up. These hacker groups are making so much money, more money than we can put at in the defense side of things. They're educated, they're very well trained, and they have experience. We are aware of several buildings in Russia that we believe that there are almost universities set up where they're training these hackers to become better at what they do. There's levels of education that they go through, but they're so much better educated. You remember the days when you would get a weird email and you knew it was fake because it just didn't sound like proper English, or it didn't make sense, so you could catch it that way. Well, that's not the way it goes anymore. There's so many of these groups that are very well funded, so they're very well educated. They understand English. They can speak proper English and dialect, so they're much better educated. The malware that they introduced, that they're developing, is so much more sophisticated, and we're going to talk about that when I show how it happens. It has become a trend that the malware is changing on a daily basis of what it does, but it's so sophisticated and so powerful that it does so much in such a little bit of time. We'll talk about that, but you'll be amazed at how fast it can get things done and do what it needs to do and exfiltrate data from your system. These hackers and these groups are very thorough in what they do. They're diligent in what they do, and they're very patient. What that means is that they can take their time. If you're making $400,000 on every transaction, you're doing 40 or 50 of those a month, you're making enough money where you can do it right, where you can take your time and make sure that things are done right. So that's what they are. They're very thorough, and they're very patient. And if they are trying to get into a company, they'll continue working at it till they get into a company and exploit the vulnerability. Those are the 4 major trends that we're seeing in the attacks nowadays. And they're making so much money. Let's talk about the impact and the cost to the organizations. Again, we talk about facts and statistics. Remember, this is just what's reported. More than 90% of my clients have not reported to the government. And so those amounts are not in these statistics. But over $1 billion in ransomware revenue in 2017, that is very low. That's very low. 850 million ransomware infections. Again, 2018, that's just what's been reported. We have one that started yesterday. We had a client call us, and most likely they are not going to report. They do have some obligations, but it's never, their statistics will never get into this, their numbers will never get into the statistics. Crypto wall alone, which is a variant of a ransomware software virus, generated over $320 million that we know of. City of Atlanta. If hopefully there's no one here from Atlanta, but if you felt the problems that they went through, they were hit with ransomware, and the environment was completely shut down. And for some reason, they did not want to or could not buy the keys from the hackers with Bitcoin, so they decided to rebuild, and it cost them over $17 million to rebuild the City of Atlanta systems. And they're still rebuilding, and they're still trying to make improvements to it. 1.5 million new phishing sites are created every month. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, but phishing emails and spear phishing are terms used for those widely sent out emails that are, the IRS contacting you that they need to talk to you, or your FedEx has arrived, your Amazon shipment has arrived. Click here and enter in your user ID and password to get your Amazon update. Those are all phishing emails, phishing programs. They're not specifically sent to you independently. They're designed to catch as many people as possible. And then there are spear phishing attempts. Spear phishing is where you have those very diligent, patient hackers, and they're trying to get into a company. They see a company, they know there's some vulnerabilities, so they're trying to send an email to the head of purchasing, pretending to be the CEO, and trying to get the head of purchasing to provide them with some information or do something for them. And it's spear phishing. They're attacking because they know who they're trying to get to. That has increased dramatically. A victim of ransomware will occur every 14 seconds. Yeah, I would say that's probably accurate, or even worse than that. And a victim, meaning that it happened, not that it crippled your company and you had to pay, but an attempt for ransomware probably happens that often nowadays. So who are they? This is just a small list of the threat actors that are known and that are being tracked and that are keeping themselves public. You can see on the bottom there you hear about Anonymous. They've been around for a long time. Everyone may have heard them. But this is just some of them. Now you don't see any groups from the U.S. That's because if there are some groups in the U.S., but we have a lot more power in the U.S. to go after them. But we have no say, no power to go after these groups in Russia and North Korea and in Iran. The one particular one I put at the top is Grim Spider. Grim Spider is a group where they are actually one of the lower cells of a larger group called Wizard Spider. That's the main group. Grim Spider is they set off into a different cell because they said they're going to go after mid-sized and large organizations. Their goal is not to try and get into anything that there's an open door they can get into. They're going to focus heavily on certain trends, certain market areas, and mid to large-sized companies, and they're going to do everything they can. They're going to research. They're going to do spear phishing. They're going to send attacks to their firewall. They're going to do whatever they can to try and get into these companies because, one, they think they have money. Two, they think they might be vulnerable. And so here's a group that has publicly said, we're focusing hard on these larger organizations, and we're going to get into you. But these companies, these organizations are tracked. There's nothing we can do about it. These are the ones that have these universities. They're training people on how to do this work, and unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it. And these are the ones that are making all the money. These are the ones that are making the $400,000 per transaction. $1 billion a year. That much revenue, that much money, you can do a lot. You can build a large organization. You can really cover your tracks. You can continuously grow and build and be better. And it's very difficult to combat that and to spend the kind of money the United States should spend to try and fight off these hackers. So why is it happening? The biggest thing, the reason why it's happening is because there's vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities is a big word, it's a broad word. But It's one happening because it's profitable, like we talked about. Back 10, 15 years ago, IT guys were dealing with viruses that messed with your system and slowed it down and created problems there. It was annoying, and it was mostly hacker teenagers creating programs to disrupt a company and be publicly known that they disrupted a huge company. Well, unfortunately, what has happened over the last 10 years is that Bitcoins came into play. Bitcoins is electronic currency. It's not regulated. It's hard to track. And Bitcoins has made this in this new business of ransomware and cyber attacks very, very profitable. And it won't stop here with computers and servers and organizations. This is, as long as it continues to be profitable, it'll grow into other markets. So if you imagine, it could grow into autonomous vehicles. If you have a shipping company that has a bunch of trucks and they're all and they have a virus gets into it and locks down all the trucks, and they ask for $400,000 worth of Bitcoins, and we'll decrypt your trucks. So this profitability is going to continue to grow as long as there's a currency like this available to exchange that money, and it's not regulated and it's controlled. This will keep getting worse. One of the other reasons why it's happening is because all products that we buy, whether it's a computer or software, it's a cell phone, an iPad, all of these products were designed and built to make your life easier. That's the goal when you develop something. I want to create something that makes my life easier, makes the organization of my day better, helps me get email out faster, helps me design this car a little bit faster. So products are designed to make life easier, not to make life secure. So most of these software organizations, and Microsoft is one of the worst, but they develop these products, they make your life easier, but they don't take into account all the different variables and vulnerabilities that could come into play with this product. Vulnerabilities in the infrastructure. So your company has a huge network. Your company has computers, servers, devices all over the place. Inside that infrastructure, there are multiple possible vulnerabilities. It could come from so many different ways, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But those vulnerabilities inside the infrastructure need to be identified and addressed, but there are so many of them. Default settings is a huge reason why it's happening too. Let's take Office 365. So a lot of companies, maybe you have gone from having your email in-house or on-prem, as they call it, on-premise, and you've moved it to Office 365. And that's great because Office 365 in itself is very secure. The problem is when you set up Office 365 with default settings, you just go in and set it up with just default settings. There are inherent problems with those default settings. There's vulnerabilities. When you buy a piece of hardware and you set up, or software set up with default settings, those default settings could be extremely vulnerable for a bad actor to get into. One example is a firewall. Your firewall protects your company from everyone from the outside. If you buy a firewall, turn it on, and set it to default settings, those two default settings are very, very vulnerable. Constant changes in technology goes back to the vulnerabilities in your infrastructure. Everything changes so quickly, and it's really difficult for any of us, to always make sure that we're watching the changes in technology. Your cell phone has a new iOS update. Your computer, Windows, goes from Windows 7 to Windows 10, and on and on and on, and the constant upgrades, constant changes. And it's difficult to make sure that all those changes, the new technology, do not have vulnerabilities. And it's also very difficult to make sure everything in your environment is upgraded and up to date. And the last, but probably one of the most important pieces why it's happening is just plain human error. We'll talk a little bit about this, but the concept of getting a spear phishing email, an email from someone I know personally that says, hey, enjoyed seeing you the other day. By the way, take a look at this really cool picture I have. and I double-clicked on that picture to take a look at it, and it turns out that it was a spear phishing attempt, and I just downloaded a virus. It's human error. It's so there's lots of things you could do with human error. There's constant education and training that you can apply, but human error is one of the big factor on why it's happening today. All right, so let's talk about how it's happening. We have this is a very rudimentary, small little design of a network. Everyone's network is probably much more complicated than this, but you see, you have the internet, you have a firewall in place that protects you from everything outside your company, and then you have this thing as a router. It routes and switches, send all the data to your computers and your servers. So you have this whole network environment, and we're going to talk a little bit about how some of these breaches come in. And the number one breach way it happens is typically email, and that's going back to the human error thing. Office 365, default settings, email, someone presses on an email that has a link and it downloads a virus. That is one of the number one ways. So this is going back to that spear phishing and the phishing attempts. Someone gets an email, they think it's a document they're supposed to be getting from the client, they double click it, and inside is a payload or a virus, or it's a link that you thought you were getting an Amazon delivery, and you press on the link, and all of a sudden something happens and your computer shuts down and you've infected the environment. That's one way it gets in, and it is one of the most popular ways that it does happen. The second, not second, but one of the other ways that it happens is through firewall. Firewalls that are installed with default settings and not properly maintained. Firewalls that are installed and with someone who is not an expert and not a security expert and doesn't set it up properly. Just so everyone knows, and I apologize if there's some IT people on the call, but the firewall itself, it protects the company, but inside this firewall has a whole bunch of rules. And these are kind of like telling the bouncer at a bar what's allowed to happen. These type of people are allowed to come in. These type of people are not allowed to come in. You're allowed to let these people out, and that's what the firewall does. These rules are set so that it allows certain things to go out and allows certain things to come in. And you can say, listen, we don't have any business with Russia, so I'm going to block anything that's coming in from Russia. And these firewalls, if they're not properly maintained, those ports, those rules are wide open. And what happens is these hackers send out their little virus spiders across the internet, and they're going to all of these firewalls, and they're knocking on the door. They're trying to see if there's any of these things open to exploit it, they can get in. And that's so when it's not properly maintained, not properly reviewed by experts, those open doors and those open ports are created. Some other ways that we've seen it get into the environment, how it's happening, is through remote desktop sessions. So a lot of people, companies have people that work remotely, and they want to get to their computer back in the office, or they want to get to a server to get data off it. So they offer remote desktop connections to their environment. If not properly set up, if it's just installed default settings, remote desktop, that is a wide open vulnerability. If it's open to the world, that's a very large vulnerability that hackers can exploit to get right into your environment. If you do FTP, secure transfers, file transfers, and you have a server, you do this SFTP server. If those aren't properly hardened or locked down, patched, and the rules and are created properly, those are huge vulnerabilities for hackers. Backdoors. And backdoors, I don't mean by what hackers put in. A lot of times, software programs, servers, computers, they do have these backdoors created in case there's something wrong and you can't get into the system. Those backdoors have to be shut, controlled, locked down. Rogue wireless access points. When N1 Discovery gets called into a cyber incident and we're asked to figure out how it happened, one of many things that we do is we walk around the facility. We don't care if it's a 3,000 square foot manufacturing facility. We're looking for rogue wireless access points. And what we mean by that is you have a warehouse, you have a large office, and back in the far southeast corner, the wireless is pretty bad, and the employees hate the fact that they can't get wireless there, but everyone else can get wireless on the other side of the building. So one day someone brings in a wireless router into the office and just plugs it into the internet port by their desk, and all of a sudden now they have wireless. Well, what that's doing is essentially bypassing all of the firewall and all the other rules, and it leaves an open door, an open internet door. And we found them underneath desks, taped to the backside of desks, hidden in drawers, up in the ceiling tiles, because they know they're not supposed to do it, and they don't want anyone to find it. And then application vulnerabilities and old computers, old operating systems. Old operating systems are large, a big concern. Windows XP, now coming is Windows 2007. That is going to be end of life and not supported anymore as of, I think, January of 2020. So these are all Windows operating systems that Microsoft does not support anymore, does not send patches, and does not provide any updates to it. So there are inherent and major vulnerabilities that leave wide open doors for someone to get in from the outside. Now, we know, working with a lot of manufacturing companies, a lot of industries still have to use XP and still have to use old operating systems because they have machines that only run on XP. We understand that, but when they're hooked up to the network and then they're hooked up to the internet, that is a huge vulnerability and a major access point. And we've seen many, many cases where they were able to get in through Windows XP or an older version of an operating system. And then social engineering and bring your own device are two also possible ways. Social engineering means that someone literally is trying to email or call or get someone to let them in the door, give them access somehow by trying to pretend there's someone not, or just social engineering an individual to let them in. And bring your own device is big. A lot of companies allow you to bring a laptop, a cell phone, an iPad, a device, a thumb drive. How many of you have, the ability, your employees have the ability to bring in a thumb drive and plug it into their computer? Well, it really should not be allowed because you don't know what's on that thumb drive. If they're at home and it's plugged into their computer and there is a virus and a hacker on that computer just sitting waiting to find something valuable or do something with it, and that thumb drive is infected, and they bring it into the office and plug it into the laptop, then they've just infected everyone, the whole network. So the bringing your own device and a thumb drive is a big problem. Okay, so let's talk about, outside of how it happens, is what happens when it's in. So this is critical to understand really how this works, because if you ever have dealt with it or you ever will deal with it, you understand how effective and what it really does impact. So what happens when one of those vulnerabilities we talked about, when it gets in, the malware, the virus, is introduced. So it usually gets into one area. So let's say it got into a server because of remote desktop. It gets a hold of that server, it drops that virus, and it starts to turn that server into what we call patient zero. And it starts to turn that server as the source of their next few attempts of stealing your data, encrypting your environment. So that server is the home device now. What it does is it takes that server, and it's so sophisticated, it starts to change the server. It starts to turn off antivirus. It starts to turn off certain things so that it allows it to continue to work. Once it's got a hold of that server, it calls back to the mothership. So this virus is dropped into your environment. It's on the server. It gets control of it. Then it shoots a message back to the mothership and says, "I'm in. Send the rest of the robots." Now other malware and other programs are being sent over to the server. And once it's inside, these little robots, these little viruses are sent out across the network to do many, many things. Some of those things are, one of the programs is designed just to go through and try and scrape every device that comes across, looking for passwords, looking for social security numbers, looking for credit card numbers, looking for other email addresses, names, things like that. As it's collecting that data, it's sending it back out to the mothership. It's sending that data back out, but it's also using that data to move on to the next device within the system. So if it gets to one server and that server has a password, it's going through using all the passwords it collected to see if it can get into it. It's very, very sophisticated. So all these programs are dropped, and it's going around from one server to the next, to one person's computer to the next. These programs are so smart that it will avoid certain servers if it thinks that server has some advanced antivirus on it that they can't shut down. So they'll avoid it. It's also smart enough where if it's looking for backups, one of the main programs that it does drop and deploy in the environment is looking for where's the backup environment. Where's this company back up its data? It's so sophisticated now that if it sees that it is backed up offline, it also is trying to figure out who has the credentials to the off-site cloud-based backups. And it's designed to try and get to those backups and start destroying them or encrypt them or delete them. The worst part about the most sophisticated part about all of this, these programs that this system drops, is that it starts to delete itself and cover its tracks. It's very scary that now what these hackers have figured out is they don't want the antivirus and the anti-malware programs to know who they are, because then they'll release a new definition that'll catch it next time. So it tries to delete its tracks. It tries to delete itself as it's leaving. Before it leaves, before it starts covering its tracks, it's leaving these little time bombs, these ransomware encryption time bombs. So you imagine these little robots went through your whole environment, got to all your system. It's found a whole bunch of credit cards, social security number, passwords, a whole bunch of sensitive data. That data is shipped out to the mothership. And then as it's backing up, it's laying these little time bombs. And as it's done backing itself off, the time bombs go off. And the time bombs are the encryption. So it starts encrypting all the data on the workstations, on the servers. And as it's encrypting, it's leaving also little messages, which is the ransomware note. So most of the ransomware that we see, if you have a Word document, is encrypted, where you cannot decrypt it. There are no tools that are going to be decrypting this data. Along with that particular Word document is a text file named the same as the Word document, and it's usually readme.txt or something like that. What that text file contains is a simple text file that just is the ransom note itself. And it's from the hackers, and they said, you've been infected. You do not try to delete these text files because you won't decrypt your data. If you try to decrypt your data, you'll probably corrupt it. And if you want the keys to decrypt the environment, email us at this email address, and we'll start the transaction. So that's what gets you to the point where you are now the company's locked down, completely encrypted, the backups are gone, and you have this ransomware note that says contact us to buy the bitcoins. The problem there is, and this is where cyber incident response friends companies like ours come into play, is if you're at that point and you want to buy the bitcoins, if you realize there's no way to recover and you've got to buy the bitcoins, you want to make sure that a third party is doing that. You don't want to. I don't want to do it. on your home computer, because now they know where you're at their home computer. So normally what we do is we have a separate environment, a separate internet connection that they could never trace back, and we communicate with the hackers, and we hopefully try to negotiate. The last larger ransomware was requested was, I think, $500,000 worth of Bitcoins, and we're able to negotiate down to $250,000. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Once you've negotiated, the process of buying that many Bitcoins is difficult. You have to make sure someone has a broker and be able to buy that many Bitcoins, and then transfer to the bad actor. The bad actor gets the Bitcoins and then provides you with the key. Prior to that, we've sent them a couple samples of our client's data, of your encrypted data, and they send it back decrypted so they can prove it's them and they can decrypt it. So usually they will offer a couple files that they'll decrypt for us to prove it. Unfortunately, what's happened is when they provide the keys, sometimes what you want to do is take those keys, put in your system, run the decryption keys, and decrypt all of your data and move on. But a lot of these encryption keys, the hackers are embedding more malware, embedding more suspicious, malicious files that will later on be able to reinfect their environment or possibly open up a back door for them. So a cyber forensics company should be able to deploy these keys in a safe environment like a sandbox with some of your data and watch to see what happens with these keys and with the computer to see if there's anything malicious that's dropped. Once you have the keys and you feel they're safe, then you go about the process of decrypting. And unfortunately, sometimes the decryption doesn't work. Most of the time it does. Most of the time it does work. Sometimes data that is not standard Microsoft Word, PDF, Excel, those seem to decrypt easily. But if you have a database, a SQL database, an email database, those sometimes have difficulty and are unable to be decrypted without corruption. So unfortunately, there is some of that, but that's the process, and that's how the hackers get in. Now, what happens once they get in? The scary part about all this is up to about a year and a half ago, we would assume a lot of what just happened, there was a human person in that system. That the virus got in, they opened the door, the hacker got in, and the hacker had to do all that themselves. This process that I just described is all done by software, all done by the little malware and those robots, those executable robots, all done by these little robots with no human intervention whatsoever. And this even with a very large network, could be in and done within 24 hours, within 10 hours, even less sometimes. All of what we just described could be done within several hours of it being introduced. Very fast and without human intervention. So the software is smarter. Like we talked about, the malware is so much more powerful. It looks like a human should be doing it, but the software is doing it faster than any humans could actually try to accomplish themselves. So what can you do to protect yourself? Besides shut down and don't have internet, don't have computers, there are some things that you can do to protect yourself. They're not as expensive as they used to be. The industry has come down a little bit on cost for some of this stuff, but there are some simple things you can do. You can look for a cyber security, forensic security company to do a third-party internal and external vulnerability assessment or audit. Now, be careful, I said cyber, because you could find IT companies that are not really cyber specialists, not forensic specialists that say they will do an audit, will do an assessment, will do a pen test, and they may not have all the tools, and they may not be looking for the same things that a cyber security group would. But this internal and external vulnerability assessment will tell you all of those vulnerabilities that we talked about, which ones you have, and why you have them, and how to correct them. It'll tell you which computers are not patched properly, how many Windows XPs you have in the system. It'll tell you that the firewall is not configured correctly. It'll tell you that you have a remote desktop session open to the world on a computer. And it gives you all of these vulnerabilities, and it varies the vulnerabilities, organizes them based on severity. How bad is this vulnerability? So you as a company can take this report and say, all right, let's go down the list and get rid of these high vulnerabilities first and start planning out the cost and the process and procedures in order to fix these vulnerabilities. You want to have the same type of audit done on cloud-based systems, Office 365, any of your cloud-based environments. If someone set those up for you, if you're using a cloud-based service, you want to have the same type of cybersecurity company audit those controls and those default settings to make sure that it's hardened, locked down, and you have the right features set up. And make sure you've made changes on all the suggestions that this audit or assessment would do. There is layered security that your IT company could deploy. If they could find and work with a company that provides things like a SIM, and basically what a SIM and a SIM stock is a program that is connected to your environment. And what it does is reading all the logs and all the activity on everything in your environment and looking for anomalies, looking for what potential problems. For example, if I logged into my computer in one side of the building and seconds later logged into another computer on the other side of the building, that's humanly impossible. The system would say, that's odd, there's a problem, and shoot an alert to whoever's managing this saying, there's a problem here. If you're moving data from one machine to another machine that's a large amount of data at 4 o'clock in the morning, and that's never done that before, it'll flag it and say, there's a problem. Why is this happening? So there are those types of things. There's also something, and I apologize it's not up on the screen, but is a major factor in something you can apply is dual authentication. If you don't already have it, or if you don't have it on everything, you definitely need to look into it. This means that this is you could get little token coins. You can get put it on your cell phone. And so for my clients and even for my company, we have dual factor authentication on almost everything we have. So if I want to get into my email, I go in and put my user ID and password, and then I get a message from my phone saying, do you authenticate this? If I try and log into my computer, same thing. If I try and log into some major programs, same thing, certain programs. So you can do dual factor. What happens there, it stops for anyone who gets your credentials for some reason, gets your Office 365 credentials, gets your computer credentials, and they try and log in. It stops right there and needs a second authentication. And so the only way that hacker could actually do this is if they had your credentials and had your phone or the hard token by them. At that point in time, that's pretty scary, but it'll stop most attacks with using credentials to get into a system. You can also provide a lot of education in the workforce. There are programs, there are companies, and we do this also, where you can do ongoing training and testing of your employees. You can do nonstop phishing attempts to see if they'll fall for it. These programs are automated and they report back to you. So there's not a lot of effort, manual effort in this. It's set up and it goes throughout the year testing your employees to see if they'll fall for a phishing attempt, fall for a spear phishing attempt. Sometimes we'll send a message saying to the HR person saying that's it's the CEO, and they didn't bother to see if the name of the company was spelled just a little bit differently to see if they fall for it. And also provides training, just little 5-minute videos, 5-minute trainings that you can require your employees to go through once a quarter, twice a year, something like that, that just gives them nonstop education and training so they don't fall victim to some of these phishing and spear phishing attempts. And enforce policies and procedures. I know passwords. People hate passwords, hate difficult passwords, but following the difficult password, complex password policy procedures is very important. And there are certifications out there that do help you. Having a SOC certification does not always means that you're not vulnerable, but having SOC 2 or SOC for cyber, which is new, the more advanced certification gets you closer to that point. All SOC compliance programs, all compliance program certifications does not mean you don't have vulnerabilities. Does not mean that there are no vulnerabilities. It just means that you followed their process, procedures, and controls. You passed their controls. Does not mean you're safe. And my last slide before I take any questions is these are the two biggest phrases I hear from my clients before I meet with them, and they tell me this when that this is what they felt before an incident happened. That their IT department tells them they're completely safe and that they're SOC compliant. Every single CEO, board, president of company has told me that. And I have ones that have then been breached, and I've helped them through it. It's just too hard for any one company or any head of IT to be able to say that they're completely safe. So at that, Leo, Michelle, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, Scott, thank you. So from what I can see so far, everybody's been pretty well frightened, and they don't really have any questions. But I would say they certainly have been brought up to speed as to some of the things they should be watching for in their own systems. If anybody's wondering, there are two handouts that are available. One is this presentation. Another one is a corporate brochure for N1 Discovery, if anybody wants to learn more about the system. Scott, the one thing I was wondering myself, sometimes folks are very dependent upon their laptops or their cell phones, and because they'll do business on the road, or that'll be their business, or that'll be their office. Are there things that can be done to help, that low tech, low volume type of user, or is everything that's a threat being aimed at big company systems? There are some companies that are going after big hackers going after big companies, but then the rest of them are really going after anyone they can get their hands on. So anything that is a device and has data has the opportunity to be hacked. And if you have a laptop and you do remote, you travel, and you are an individual, you can't rely on a large company to make big purchases for security. There are certain things you can do. You can look into encryption, buying encryption software for your laptop, which means that if someone tries to get into a laptop and they don't have the decryption keys, all the data inside is worthless to them. There are fairly inexpensive programs that allow you to do that. If you can, dual factor is really powerful. In other words, if you lost your laptop and someone got in, they figured out your password, you could have dual factor on that, and it sends a message to your phone, and you say, no, I do not authorize this, and the system locks the person from getting in. There's those things that protect yourself if you're traveling. And the big thing is your password. I get it. It's so easy. I can't tell you how many times we've had the administrative password for large systems is administrator or password 1, because it's just difficult to remember these passwords. It's so it's a pain to have a password that has a capital, a number, special characters. It's 9 characters long. That's a pain, and people start putting them on sticky notes and putting it on their monitor. But it comes down to the harder the password, the harder it is to crack. It's funny you mentioned the sticky note. A lot of people that I've spoken to have become so frustrated with having to have a password for virtually everything that they deal with nowadays, that they actually begin carrying some sort of a memory device to contain these passwords, which ironically helps defeat the very purpose that they're trying to serve, the passwords they're trying to serve.
Well, there are some good ones though. Like I have password vaults on my cell phone, my Apple, and the only way you can unlock it is by the passcode and my fingerprint. But inside that vault software program has a lot of my passwords. But I feel comfortable that the only way that anyone can get into it is if I had it opened and they took the phone and started looking at it. They would have to have the passcode to my phone, then the passcode to the software vault program, and my fingerprint.
Right. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, unless you borrow your fingerprint, you're safe.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So far, yeah, I mean, we've all seen things in movies where people do terrible things to get the fingerprint. But so looking at the list of questions, we don't have any questions from anybody, but that's okay. I guess they can always send in their questions later. And if anybody does have anything they want to follow up further with Scott, please let me know. I can connect you to him. I believe Scott's email is available to you on their website. So, the point today was that there are vulnerabilities in virtually everything we have around us, and that has to be something that has to concern all of us too. So whether you're a small company or a big company, keeping your systems and your company secure is clearly the message from today's webinar. So whether you contact Scott or somebody else, I think it's important that we all be aware of this and try to avoid having a bad experience. So seeing no other questions, I want to thank Scott for providing today's content, today's webinar. I want to thank Michelle for being there silently in the background, making sure the lights are on and all the wheels are turning. And of course, I want to thank all of you on the line for calling in today and participating in the webinar. We'll have recordings available of this shortly and make them available to our subscribers. So again, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you next month at our next webinar. And just check our website for the details. Thanks again, Scott. Thanks, Michelle. We'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.